A little girl comes to school alone and the teacher notices that she is strangely silent. When the girl shows a drawing of her mom under the bed, the teacher immediately calls the police. What they find in the house is something no one can believe. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The morning sun spilled through the cracked windshield of the U-Haul truck as Lauren adjusted her grip on the steering wheel and glanced back at the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Kiara sat quietly, hugging a faded teddy bear, her small face pressed against the window. The stuffed animal's seams were worn, and one ear drooped more than the other, but Lauren had long since learned not to suggest replacing it. That bear was the last gift from Kiara's father before the accident, and it had become more than a toy. It was her anchor. The suburbs unfurled around them in neat, symmetrical lines. Rows of white-fenced houses with freshly painted shutters, trimmed lawns, and driveways hosting SUVs gleaming like showroom models. Everything looked orderly, clean, even serene. Lauren knew that appearances didn't always reflect truth, but she couldn't deny the part of her that longed for what these homes seemed to promise: peace. They had been driving for over 4 hours from the city where Lauren had lived her entire life. The move was sudden, but not impulsive. After her husband Marcus died in a hit-and-run that remained unresolved, the city no longer felt safe. Sirens had replaced silence. Grief had replaced comfort. Friends stopped calling. Bills piled up. Kiara began waking at night, whispering, "Is Daddy coming home yet?" Over time, Lauren's job at the local library felt like a weight she could no longer carry. Her days were blurred shadows of who she had once been: confident, capable, vibrant. Now she was tired, hollowed by sorrow and a gnawing fear that her daughter was slipping into a sadness too heavy for a 6-year-old to bear. When she found the house listing online, it felt like a sign. A 2-bedroom cottage with a small backyard and an affordable mortgage. The photos showed a cheerful blue kitchen, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, and sunlight drenching the living room through oversized windows. It was nestled in a predominantly white neighborhood, a detail she had hesitated over but ultimately pushed aside. Her daughter deserved a fresh start. So did she. As they pulled into the driveway of their new home, Kiara sat up a little straighter, her gaze moving slowly over the yard and the white house with navy blue shutters. Lauren parked, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the keys. "We're here, baby," she said softly. Kiara didn't answer at first. She opened the door, stepped down carefully, and looked around. A red tricycle was parked across the street. A dog barked from somewhere nearby. The air smelled of cut grass and the faint perfume of blooming hydrangeas. Lauren stepped out and breathed deeply. The air was different here, less exhaust, less noise, more space to think, maybe even to heal. She began unloading boxes with Kiara's help, setting aside the ones labeled kitchen and books first. The child's box, covered in crayon doodles and stickers, had a heart drawn on the side with the word "mine." Just as Lauren hoisted a suitcase onto the porch, a voice called out, "Need a hand?" She turned. A man stood at the edge of their lawn. Tall, maybe in his early 50s, with silvering hair and a crisp collared shirt tucked into slacks. He held a cardboard box with both hands, which he gently placed on the porch rail. "I saw you pull in. Figured I'd welcome the new neighbors," he said, smiling. "I'm Richard. Live just across the street." Lauren offered a polite nod. "Thanks, that's very kind." He extended a hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat before shaking it. "You and your daughter moving in?" "Yes, just us two," Lauren said carefully. Well, if you need anything, tools, directions, a cup of sugar, you just knock. We look out for each other in this neighborhood." His smile lingered a beat too long. Kiara peered at him from behind Lauren's leg, her fingers tightening around the bear. "Hi there, sweetheart," Richard said, squatting slightly to meet her eyes. "What's your name?" "Kiara," she said softly. "Pretty name. I had a dog named Kara once," he chuckled. Lauren placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, subtly guiding her back. "We appreciate the welcome. We've got a lot to do today, so—" Of course, Richard said quickly. "I'll leave you to it, but I'll stop by later with a little something. My wife used to bake, but I do a decent banana bread." He walked away without waiting for a reply. Inside, the house was filled with dust and possibility. Lauren wiped the windows, unpacked kitchen items, and let Kiara choose which bedroom she wanted. The child picked the one with the bay window overlooking the backyard and began setting her toys in place with surprising efficiency. That night, after takeout dinner eaten on the floor among open boxes, Lauren tucked Kiara into bed and sat at the edge of the mattress. "Do you like it here?" she asked. Kiara nodded sleepily. "It's quiet." "Yes," Lauren said, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "It is." She turned on the nightlight, a soft pink glow that cast warm shapes on the wall. Then she kissed her daughter's cheek and padded into the hallway. Outside, through the curtain, she saw Richard standing on his porch, looking in her direction. She quickly stepped away from the window. The next few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Kiara began school the following Monday. Her new school was well-funded, the classrooms colorful and modern, the teacher, Mrs. Trent, smiling but distant. Lauren noticed that the other mothers didn't make much eye contact at pickup. A few nodded politely. None started a conversation. When Lauren tried to speak to the principal about after-school programs, she got vague answers and hurried smiles. At home, Richard proved to be a frequent presence. He dropped by with banana bread, then later with tools, in case she needed help tightening cabinet hinges. He noticed her mailbox needed straightening. He brought over mail addressed to the previous owner. Each time, Lauren thanked him but didn't invite him in. Something about his presence felt intrusive. His eyes lingered too long, his questions slid too close to personal. One afternoon, Kiara told her, "Mr. Richard was looking in the kitchen window when I was coloring." Lauren felt a jolt of anger but didn't show it. "What did you do?" "I just closed the curtain." Lauren considered confronting him, but she hesitated. She didn't want to cause tension in a new neighborhood. She needed peace, safety, stability for her daughter. But the unease stayed. Small things accumulated. Once, she found her front door slightly ajar when she was sure she had locked it. Another time, the garbage bin had been moved across the yard. She bought a lock for the inside of her bedroom door and ordered a motion sensor light for the porch. One night, after tucking Kiara in, Lauren sat in the living room with a cup of tea, trying to read. A soft sound drew her attention. She looked through the curtain and saw Richard crossing his lawn toward her mailbox. She waited. He opened it, looked inside, then closed it again. He didn't notice her watching. She turned off the light and sat in the dark, heart pounding. Later that week, as she was walking from the driveway with groceries, Richard appeared beside her. "You know, Lauren," he said, using her name without permission, "it must be hard doing everything alone." "I'm managing," she replied tightly. "I could help. Take Kiara to school sometimes. Watch her if you're working late. You could use the break." "I'm fine, thank you," she said, stepping past him. He reached gently for the bag she carried. "Let me help." "I said I'm fine." Lauren said more firmly, pulling away. There was a pause, a flicker in his eyes, something sharp and unreadable, but then the smile returned. Of course. Just offering? That night, Lauren double-checked every lock and lay awake listening to the stillness. She thought of leaving, but where would they go? How many places could one woman start over? She turned to the window and saw the dark shape of Richard's house, lights off, blinds closed. Lauren swallowed hard, tucked the blanket tighter around her, and whispered into the silence, "We're safe here." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she believed it. The wind rustled outside. Somewhere a dog barked, and Kiara, asleep in her room, clutched her teddy bear as if she too sensed that something, somewhere, was off. The days that followed unfolded in a strange mixture of routine and disquiet. Lauren tried to convince herself they were simply adjusting to a new environment, that the unease she felt was the product of stress, exhaustion, and the ghosts of her past that sometimes whispered through her thoughts. The house was quiet, the neighborhood orderly, and Kiara had stopped asking about her father at night. Those were good signs, weren't they? Signs of healing, of stability. Yet there were moments, small, almost imperceptible instances, that tugged at her nerves like invisible threads. Richard's appearances became more frequent. He never overstayed his welcome, never crossed an overt boundary, but there was something in his timing that felt too precise, too calculated. He always seemed to know when she was home alone. He always showed up just as she was returning from the store, or walking Kiara to the car, or watering the rose bush in the front yard. One Sunday afternoon, as Lauren was weeding the flower bed by the porch, she heard the crunch of gravel. Richard stood at the edge of the lawn holding a potted plant. "Thought you could use this," he said, lifting the pot. "Lavender. Keeps bugs away and smells nice." She forced a smile. "Thanks, that's thoughtful." He stepped forward and placed it on the porch. "I noticed your garden doesn't get much shade. Lavender's hardy, can handle the sun. You seem to know a lot about plants." "My mother loved her garden," he said. "Used to say you can tell what kind of person someone is by how they treat their soil." Lauren crouched, gloved hands in the dirt, unwilling to meet his gaze. "Is that right?" "Of course," he said, then added, "Do you need help with the rest?" "No, thank you," she replied quickly, dusting her hands off. "I've got it." He didn't move. "You sure?" She looked up then. "Yes, I'm sure." There was that flicker again behind his eyes, a moment of hesitation, of calculation, but then he smiled and stepped back. "Well, if you change your mind," he said, turning, "you know where to find me." That night, as Lauren locked the doors and checked the windows, she found herself listening again to the sounds outside. It was still early spring, and the nights were cold. Wind moved through the trees like whispers. She pressed her ear to the living room wall and heard nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. In Kiara's room, the little girl was already asleep, one arm wrapped tightly around her bear. Lauren adjusted the blanket around her and kissed her forehead, then returned to the living room and stood staring at the porch light, wondering if it had always been so dim. The following week, Lauren received a note in her mailbox. It wasn't in an envelope, just a folded sheet of lined paper with neat, even handwriting. "You shouldn't be alone so much. Some people aren't as nice as they seem." She read the sentence 3 times before crumpling it into her coat pocket. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't from him. Maybe it was a mistake. But the handwriting, the tone, the way it wasn't signed, something about it reeked of Richard, of his clean clothes and soft voice, of the way he tilted his head when he asked questions that sounded polite but felt invasive. She told herself not to panic. But the next day, she noticed a faint mark on the back door, as though someone had tried the handle. When Kiara came home from school that afternoon, she seemed quiet. Lauren prepared her a snack, apple slices and peanut butter, and asked her how school was. "Fine," Kiara said, dipping an apple slice into the bowl. "Did anything happen today?" Kiara shrugged. Mr. Richard came to the playground at recess. Lauren froze. "What do you mean?" "He said he was just walking by. He waved at me. He said you told him to say hi." "I didn't," Lauren said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Did you talk to him?" "I said hi. Then Mrs. Trent told him the playground's for kids only." Lauren exhaled slowly. "You did nothing wrong, baby." Kiara looked up. "He asked if we were going to the park this weekend." Lauren clenched her fists beneath the table. "We're not," she said firmly. The next morning, she went to the school and spoke with the principal. The woman, a pale, thin-lipped administrator named Miss Lyle, nodded politely, but didn't seem particularly concerned. "It's not uncommon for neighbors to stop by," she said. "But he's not just a neighbor," Lauren said. "He's persistent." "Did he speak to other children?" "I don't know." "Was he on school property?" Lauren stared at her. "He approached my daughter. That should be enough." Miss Lyle folded her hands. "We'll keep an eye out, but unless he returns or causes a disruption, there's not much we can do." Lauren left the office with a storm boiling in her chest. Once again, she was alone in her concern, dismissed for being too sensitive. She recognized the pattern, how quickly a black woman's intuition was written off as paranoia, how her word carried less weight when stacked against the image of a clean-cut, soft-spoken white man who baked banana bread and helped with the community garden. That night, after Kiara had gone to sleep, Lauren sat in the living room staring at her phone. Should she call the police? Report him? But what would she say? That a neighbor was being too friendly? That he wrote her a note that wasn't explicitly threatening? That he waved at her daughter? Would they even come? Instead, she texted a former co-worker from the library named Denise. "L, ever had a neighbor that just felt wrong?" "D, what do you mean?" "L, like too involved, too nice, always around. Watching. D, trust your gut, always. Want me to look him up?" "L, his name is Richard Evans, mid-50s, lives in Hopper Hills. D, on it, be safe." Lauren stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. She checked the locks again and placed a heavy chair against the front door. Then she sat on the couch and waited for sleep to come, but it didn't. The next morning, Denise responded. "D, nothing in local records, but I found an article from 5 years ago in another county. A man named Richard E. Evans was investigated for harassment. Female neighbor. No charges filed. Looks like he moved right after." Lauren's stomach twisted. She called the city's non-emergency line and filed a report. The officer on the phone sounded polite but detached, took down the information and said someone would look into it. 2 days passed, no follow-up. Then, on Thursday, Kiara brought home another drawing. Her teacher had stapled it to her folder with a note. "Your daughter is very imaginative." Lauren removed the paper and stared at it. In crayon lines, the drawing showed a little girl hiding under a table. A man stood nearby holding a rope. The girl had no mouth. The man had no eyes. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in Kiara's room, watching her daughter breathe, listening to the soft whoosh of the heater and the occasional creak of the old house. When she finally drifted into a light doze, she dreamed of footsteps outside the window and a smile too wide to be real. In the days that followed, Richard began knocking on the door instead of just hovering nearby. He always had a reason, a tool he thought she might need, a flyer for a neighborhood watch meeting, a tin of cookies. Each time she turned him away. Each time he lingered a second too long. One evening, he knocked while she was making dinner. She didn't answer. He knocked again. Kiara stood near the window, staring. "He's still there," she whispered. Lauren turned off the stove and stood still. The knocking stopped. Then the voice. "Lauren, everything okay? I just wanted to say hi." She didn't move. A minute later, footsteps retreated. She waited until she was sure he was gone, then stepped outside. On the mat was a small bundle wrapped in a napkin. Inside was a cupcake and a note. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I just want to help. We're a family now, aren't we?" The note was unsigned. Lauren didn't call the police this time. She packed a bag for her and Kiara, drove to a hotel 20 minutes away, and checked in for the night. But when she returned the next morning, the front door was locked. Everything seemed untouched. No sign of entry, no damage. The next day, Lauren installed a second lock, then a camera, then motion sensors. But what she couldn't install was a sense of safety. That was gone. She watched Kiara sleep each night, wondering how much her daughter understood, wondering if she'd already failed to protect her, wondering how much further this had to go before someone else finally saw what she did. Because Richard wasn't just a neighbor. Not anymore. And she was starting to fear that he never had been. The wind that swept through the quiet streets of Harper Hills that Monday morning carried with it the faint rustle of fallen leaves and a stillness that Lauren had grown to dread. It was the kind of quiet that didn't soothe. It unsettled. The kind that wrapped around a house and seeped into its corners like fog, thick and watchful. She stood at the kitchen sink, eyes fixed on the narrow window above it, watching Kiara's small figure walking down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. Normally, Lauren would have walked her. She never missed it. But this morning, everything was different. Her daughter had dressed herself, poured her cereal, and walked out the front door without more than a whispered goodbye. Lauren had tried to get up, but her limbs were leaden, her thoughts spinning, her body aching from where the cord had cut into her wrists and ankles. The memory of rough carpet scraping her back, the muffled cries she couldn't make through the gag, and the looming darkness under the bed still clung to her like a second skin. She had tried to scream that first night, tried to thrash and twist, but the way he'd tied her, she could hardly breathe, let alone fight. He had come in like smoke, invisible at first. A quiet turn of the lock, a heavy step on the floorboard she had once thought about fixing. Then the blow, sharp, fast, and blinding. Everything after that came in pieces. The scrape of the bed spring as she was dragged, the weight of the mattress above, the darkness, and the silence. Kiara had been home. Her baby girl had been just one wall away. Lauren didn't know how many hours had passed before the pain in her shoulders had dulled into numbness, or how long after that she had heard Kiara's soft voice through the floorboards calling out, "Mommy," again and again, and now Kiara was walking to school alone. Alone, because Lauren could barely move without pain jolting down her spine. Alone, because she was trying to pretend everything was normal. Alone, because Lauren had failed her. The day crawled. Lauren sat in the living room wrapped in a blanket, staring at the door. Every creak, every groan of the old house made her flinch. Her phone rested on the coffee table, screen dark, but the memory of Richard's message echoed louder than any ring could.
We're a family now." The words scrawled in crooked ink haunted her. He had said it as if he believed it, as if he had convinced himself. She remembered his eyes just before the blow, calm, almost gentle, like someone putting down an animal. She had been nothing more than an obstacle to him. At 3:15, the school bus pulled up. Lauren was waiting at the window. Kiara stepped off alone, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her posture straight but her eyes hollow. She walked up the path, opened the door, and shut it behind her without saying a word. "Hi, baby," Lauren said, her voice rough. Kiara nodded. "Did you have lunch?" Another nod. Lauren watched as her daughter took off her shoes, set her bag down in its usual place, and walked into the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table, swinging her legs gently. "Kiara," Lauren said again, trying to sound steady, "do you want to talk about anything?" Kiara didn't look at her. "Did you sleep?" Lauren hesitated. "A little." The child nodded and drank her water. Later, as Lauren sorted through Kiara's school folder, she found a new drawing tucked into the back pocket. It was crayon on lined paper, the kind used in early writing practice. A house, a big one. At first glance, it looked cheerful. Flowers, sunshine, a tree. But in the lower corner, near the base of the house, was a small rectangle drawn in black. Beneath it, a red stick figure curled up beneath a bed. A taller figure stood beside the bed, drawn with a red face and wide, round eyes. The child had written one word in uneven letters. "Shh." Lauren's hands trembled as she held the drawing. She couldn't pretend anymore. The next morning, Kiara arrived at school again by herself. She didn't say anything to the teacher, didn't complain, didn't smile. During the free drawing, she sat alone and filled an entire page with black lines. The teacher, Miss Trent, paused by her desk. "That's a very dark picture, Kiara." Kiara said nothing. "Are those shadows?" Still nothing. "You can draw something happier if you want." Kiara looked up at her then, her expression unreadable, and calmly said, "Mommy's still sleeping." It was enough to send Miss Trent straight to the principal's office. By noon, a social worker had been called. The school counselor joined in. There was a flurry of whispering adults, documents pulled, files opened. A call was placed to the non-emergency police line. When the officers arrived at the school, Kiara was in the nurse's office, sitting on the cot with her legs tucked under her, the same bear clutched in her lap. Her eyes were wide, too quiet for a child who should have been smiling, laughing, maybe even misbehaving. Officer Ray knelt beside her. "Hi, Kiara, my name's Ray. This is Officer Davis. We just want to talk to you. Is that okay?" Kiara nodded. "Your teacher says you drew a picture of your mom. Can you tell us about it?" Kiara blinked. "She's under the bed." "Under the bed?" "She can't come out." "Why not?" Kiara looked down. "He said not to let her out." "Who said that?" "I don't know." Ray looked at Davis. Davis gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Sweetheart, when was the last time you saw your mommy standing up?" Kiara thought for a moment. "Friday night. She tucked me in. Then she wasn't there in the morning." "Did she leave?" "She didn't leave. She was under the bed." They called it in. Lauren was found a little over an hour later. The officers knocked twice, announced themselves. When no answer came, they tried the knob. Locked, but from inside. Davis called Kiara's name. There was a pause, then the sound of tiny footsteps. The door creaked open. Lauren was beneath the bed, limbs bound, mouth gagged, barely conscious. An ambulance came. Neighbors gathered. The story spread like wildfire. One of them said, That can't be. Richard, he mows our lawn. He brings cookies on Christmas. But it was him. He had a key. He had waited until dark, until Lauren had turned off the porch light, until Kiara was in bed. He had known the floorboards wouldn't creak if he stepped only along the edges. He had known which door she kept unlocked when she felt safe. And then he had disappeared. Lauren, once she could speak, told them what had happened. Slowly, through cracked lips and a whispery voice, she described how he had come in, how he had struck her, how she had tried to fight, how he had smiled as he dragged her under. He said Kiara would be better off, she murmured to the nurse. He said he would take care of her. Kiara, in the meantime, sat in the waiting room of the hospital with the bear in her lap. A kind nurse gave her crackers and juice, but she didn't eat. Her eyes stayed locked on the double doors, waiting. When they wheeled Lauren out, bandaged and pale, Kiara stood and ran to her. The reunion was quiet. Just a small hand sliding into a weak one, a breathless, "Mommy?" and a barely audible, "I'm here." That night, under police supervision, Lauren was admitted to the hospital for overnight observation. Kiara was taken into temporary care just until Lauren was well enough. They promised it wouldn't be long. But Kiara didn't cry. Not then. Not when she was driven to the shelter. Not when she was shown a room with a pink blanket and a nightlight shaped like a moon. She just held the bear and waited. It would be 2 more days before she would draw again, and when she did, she used only black, only red, only silence. In the sterile, humming quiet of the hospital room, Lauren stared at the ceiling tiles as if they held answers. Her body ached in ways she didn't yet understand. Her wrists still burned from where the cloth had cut into her skin, and her breath came shallow. The beeping of machines beside her felt too loud, too mechanical, as if they reminded her with every pulse that she was still alive, that she had survived something meant to keep her silent. The fluorescent light above flickered once and held steady. Outside her door, voices murmured. Doctors, nurses, perhaps a police officer again, and inside her chest, dread coiled low and steady. She had only been conscious for a few hours, but in that time she had learned enough. Kiara was safe. She had been found. She had been fed. A social worker named Miss Washington was assigned to her and had stayed with her the previous night. That knowledge alone kept Lauren from spiraling into despair. Yet it didn't quiet the rage beneath her ribs, the scream she wanted to let out but didn't, because there was no sound big enough to express the violation of being dragged from your life and buried alive in your own home. Worse still was knowing your child had walked the same floors as your captor, had slept in her room while you were gagged beneath the bed. 2 detectives had already interviewed her, briefly, gently, with the caution of people who knew the fragile state of a newly unearthed body. She had given them the name. She had said it as plainly as she could, without anger or heat, because truth required no decoration. Richard Evans, my neighbor. He said we were a family now. The female officer, a sharp-eyed woman with a quiet, steady voice, had written everything down. Her name was Carter, and Lauren remembered the way she looked at her, not with pity, but with a kind of fierce, quiet fury. It was Carter who promised, "We're going to find him. We're going to make sure he never gets near you or your daughter again." And somehow Lauren believed her. While she lay in the hospital bed, unable to sit up without help, the rest of the world spun into motion. Richard Evans' house was searched. His phone was pinged. Neighbors were interviewed. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others admitted in murmured voices that he had always been a little off, but that he was always polite, always generous, the kind of man who shoveled sidewalks in winter and remembered birthdays. He was the kind of man people trusted with spare keys, with watching over packages, with glancing in on a child while a parent was running late. He had worn normalcy like a second skin. In the back bedroom of Richard's house, detectives found a locked wooden chest. Inside were scraps of cloth, some with Lauren's name stitched faintly in blue thread, scraps taken from clothing, from the laundry line, from discarded shirts. Beneath those were several drawings, clearly done by a child, including one that Carter recognized instantly. It was a copy of a drawing Kiara had once brought to school, her and her mother standing in a garden. That drawing had disappeared months ago. There were more: hair wrapped in twine, a set of small barrettes Kiara had lost, a pink shoelace, a crumpled grocery list in Lauren's handwriting, photos. Some taken through a window, one of Kiara walking home from school, another of Lauren reading on the porch, and then the note. "We don't need anyone else." It was written in block letters, neat, even, unthreatening at first glance, but in context it was damning. Back at the hospital, Lauren was moved from the critical wing to a standard recovery room. She could sit up now, though the act still hurt. Carter returned, this time with more questions, and this time Lauren was ready. She told her everything: the flowers on the doorstep, the gifts, the banana bread, the moments that had felt wrong but were too small to report, the way her gut twisted when he stood too close, the way she had talked herself out of her own fear again and again because she didn't want to be that woman, the one who accused a man of being dangerous just because he smiled too much. She confessed her shame, her guilt, her fury. "He walked around like he belonged," Lauren said, voice low, "like I should have been grateful for detention." Carter listened, never interrupting. "He watched my child. He held her hand. Lauren's voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "People saw him do it. They let him," Carter said softly. "People see what they want to see. We see it now, and it's enough." Meanwhile, Kiara remained at the shelter, a small, clean facility where each child had their own bed and shelf and space to be alone if they needed. She didn't speak much. She drew, but even her pictures had changed. No more houses or suns. Now she drew circles. Closed, dark, enclosing shapes with tiny figures inside. When asked who the figures were, she simply said, "Mommy." One of the staff members, a woman named Ava, who had a gentle voice and the wavy hair that reminded Kiara of clouds, tried her best to connect. "You're very brave," Ava said one afternoon, kneeling beside her as Kiara drew. Kiara didn't answer. "Do you want to write something about your picture?" Kiara shook her head. Ava placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. We're here when you're ready." Back at the police station, the evidence mounted. Richard's past, once sealed, began to crack open. There had been another incident, 6 years ago. A woman in another state, another neighborhood, same pattern, letters, gifts, boundaries crossed. She had filed a restraining order, but the case had disappeared quietly, settled without fanfare. He had agreed to counseling. She had moved away. The detectives tracked her down. Her name was Mary, her story eerily similar, and when she heard Lauren's name, her voice trembled. "I knew he'd do it again," she said. "I tried to tell people. No one listened." With Mary's testimony, Carter and her team filed for expedited charges: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, child endangerment, burglary, stalking. The list grew. Richard had not returned to his home since the day Kiara let the officers inside. His car was found abandoned near a state park. For 48 hours he was considered missing. For 48 hours Lauren did not sleep. Then he was found, sitting calmly on a bench in a gas station 3 towns over, sipping coffee from a foam cup. When the officers approached, he looked up and smiled. "I was just giving her space," he said. He went quietly. The trial began slowly, the way such things do. Motions, hearings, depositions. Lauren declined to appear at the initial arraignment. Instead, she watched from the hospital room as the footage played on the news. Richard in handcuffs, head high as if he were the wronged party. She turned the television off. Carter visited the next morning. "He pled not guilty," she said. "We expected that." Lauren didn't respond. But with the evidence, the witness statements, the testimony from Mary, the case is strong. We'll push for no bail. Lauren nodded. "Good." "Kiara will be brought to visit you today," Carter added. "Just for a little while. She's been asking." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Is she okay?" "She's quiet, but she's okay." An hour later, the door to the hospital room opened and Kiara stepped in, her hand clutched tightly in Ava's. She wore a pink sweater and jeans. Her shoes were mismatched. Her eyes were tired. Lauren sat up slowly, arms outstretched. "Hi, baby." Kiara didn't speak. She walked to the bed, climbed up beside her mother, and wrapped her arms around her without a word. They stayed like that for a long time. Later, as Ava and the nurse waited outside, Lauren gently touched Kiara's face. "Did he hurt you?" she whispered. Kiara shook her head. "Did he talk to you?" Kiara nodded. "What did he say?" "That you were sleeping, that I had to be good, that we were a family now." Lauren's stomach turned. "But I knew he was lying," Kiara added. "How?" "Because you always say family means safe, and I wasn't safe." Lauren kissed her daughter's forehead. "You're safe now." Outside, Carter stood beside Ava, watching through the small window in the door. "They'll need help," Ava said. "They'll get it," Carter replied. "But not just now, not just the system. They need people who listen. They'll have that, too." And as the sun dipped behind the clouds and the wind picked up outside the hospital, Lauren and Kiara held each other in a silence deeper than words, a silence full of pain and survival and the first fragile hope of healing. The truth was out now, and it would never be buried again. The light in the hospital room had changed. It no longer cast harsh squares of brightness against the white walls, but had softened into something gentler, warmer, like the hush of early spring melting slowly into summer. Lauren could feel the difference, not just in the sunbeams that touched the floor each morning, but in the way her hands no longer trembled when she reached for a glass of water. Healing came slowly, like the tide. Not a flood, but a quiet insistence that things would not always hurt this much. After nearly 2 weeks of medical care and observation, she was discharged from the hospital. She walked out through the sliding doors with a cane in one hand and Ava on the other side, steadying her when the pain in her ribs pulled her sideways. The fresh air struck her face like a baptism. The world was still there. Trees, cars, birdsong. And her daughter was waiting by the car, small and wide-eyed, clutching a paper bag filled with her favorite markers and a half-eaten granola bar. Kiara sat in the back seat as Ava drove. The ride was quiet. They didn't go back to the house on Sycamore Lane. That place was sealed off, a crime scene for the time being, and even if it hadn't been, Lauren knew she could never return. It no longer belonged to them, even if her name was still on the lease. Some houses become haunted the moment safety is shattered. She didn't want Kiara to step foot in that kitchen again, or walk past the bed where her mother had been hidden like a broken doll. Instead, they were taken to a transitional housing facility for victims of domestic violence and assault. It wasn't a shelter in the traditional sense. It looked like a modest row of townhouses nestled behind a red brick community center. Each unit had its own front door, a small yard, and windows that let in the morning sun. There were other families there too, women with children, some pregnant, some older, all walking the same invisible road toward restoration. Their unit was simple: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen with pale cabinets and laminate floors, a modest couch, a dining table, clean sheets. Lauren was grateful for every inch of it. She moved slowly through the space, still sore, her body stiff but functional, her movements watched closely by Kiara, who stayed within arm's reach for the first several days. They built new routines: breakfasts of oatmeal and bananas, mornings spent at medical checkups or therapy sessions, afternoons at the park nearby, evenings with picture books, and at night, Kiara would sleep curled against Lauren's side, her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around her mother's hand, as if letting go might mean losing her again. Lauren didn't fight it. She needed the contact too. She began therapy twice a week, sessions held at the community center just across the walkway. Her counselor, Marcia, was a calm woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice. Lauren appreciated that she didn't use delicate phrases or gentle euphemisms. Marcia asked direct questions and waited quietly for the answers, never rushing, never pushing too hard. "How are you sleeping?" "I'm not." "Why?" "I keep dreaming that I'm still under the bed." "And Kiara?" "She doesn't talk about it, but she flinches when the toaster clicks." Marcia nodded. "Children know more than we think. She's watching you. She senses everything." "I know," Lauren whispered, "and that's what terrifies me the most." Kiara, too, had sessions with a child therapist named Jordan, a woman with bright scarves and shelves full of soft toys and drawing supplies. For the first few visits, Kiara didn't speak. She drew. Always in thick black lines, circles within circles, houses with no windows, suns with angry rays. But one day, she picked up a yellow crayon and colored the edge of the page, then another. Then she added a small tree. When Jordan asked her what the tree was, Kiara replied, "It's where we'll live next." Lauren wept when she heard that. Ava visited often, bringing art supplies, snacks, sometimes just company. She sat with Kiara while Lauren napped. She helped them apply for assistance, handled paperwork, made sure Lauren's medical bills were routed through the victim's fund. Lauren had never been someone who asked for help easily, but she learned quickly that survival required community. It was Ava who found her a part-time position at the local library. Just 10 hours a week, organizing children's books and managing the story hour. Lauren hesitated at first. Was it too soon? What if she had a panic attack? What if someone touched her shoulder and she recoiled in front of a group of toddlers? But Ava had gently encouraged her. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up." So she did. Her first day was quiet. The children came with their mothers, sat on the carpet, listened to a volunteer read about talking animals and brave princesses. Lauren kept to the side, stacking books, avoiding eye contact. But when one small boy began to cry and the volunteer fumbled, Lauren found herself walking forward, kneeling down, and whispering, "Do you want me to read?" He nodded through tears, and so she did. Her voice was soft, shaky at first, but it grew steady. As she turned the pages, she looked up and saw Kiara at the back of the room, watching. Her daughter didn't smile, but her eyes were wide with something Lauren hadn't seen in weeks: recognition. That night, Kiara curled into her lap and whispered, "You sounded like yourself again." Lauren didn't answer. She just held her tighter. As the weeks passed, more pieces began to click back into place. Lauren started cooking again. Simple meals, nothing elaborate, but enough to make their temporary home smell lived in. Kiara returned to school, though she remained quiet and guarded, avoiding questions, sticking close to the teacher, rarely speaking unless spoken to. Still, there were signs. She began drawing again. Not just circles, but gardens, birds, even a girl with braids standing next to a tall tree. She made a friend, a shy boy named Daniel, who shared his glue sticks and said her bear was cool. She didn't tell him what happened. She didn't have to. Lauren found herself in conversation with other women at the center. Late-night tea in the shared courtyard. Stories passed quietly across the table. A woman who had fled with 3 children. Another who had left in the middle of the night with nothing but a purse and a car key. There was grief in every voice, but also strength, also humor, a quiet sisterhood forged in fire. One afternoon, Lauren sat at the kitchen table filling out an application for a more permanent apartment. The transitional unit was temporary, and they'd been given 4 more months before needing to move. She didn't know where they'd end up, but for the first time she felt something close to hope. Kiara sat nearby drawing. When Lauren looked over, she saw a house, a new one, different from before. It had windows, flowers, a small swing in the yard. "What's this one called?" Lauren asked gently. Kiara looked up. "Our forever home." Lauren blinked back tears. "Can I live there too?" Kiara nodded. "But no locks outside the doors." "No," Lauren said. "Never again." That night, Lauren tucked her daughter into bed. Kiara stared up at the ceiling. "Mommy?" "Yes?" "When I close my eyes, sometimes I still see the dark." "I know," Lauren whispered. "But now I think of the tree, the one in my picture. And then the dark gets smaller." Lauren brushed a curl away from her daughter's face. "You made that tree." Kiara smiled just a little. When the lights were off and the night had settled around them, Lauren lay awake for a while. She thought of the future, of court dates, of statements, of standing in a room with him again, of having to see his face. Her body trembled, but then she remembered the boy in the library who had stopped crying when she read. She remembered the way Kiara's voice had returned, slow but certain. She remembered the other women, Olivia, Mia, Joy, who had shared their stories and held her hand. They were returning. Not to the life they had before, but to something else. Something hard-earned and tender. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And they were still standing. The air outside was beginning to feel like spring at last, warm enough to shed jackets by noon, cool enough to keep the windows open without stifling. In the mornings, birdsong drifted through the thin curtains of the townhouse, soft and repetitive, like a child's humming. Lauren had started waking before her alarm again, not from nightmares this time, but from lightness. Some small sliver of her body no longer clenched in defense. She no longer gasped herself awake. The dark images had not disappeared entirely, but they receded like smoke with each passing night. It had been nearly 2 months since the night she was found. The townhome where she and Kiara lived now still bore the telltale signs of transience: suitcases tucked in corners, sparse furniture, a chipped mug that had once belonged to someone else. But something had shifted. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee in the mornings. Kiara had covered the refrigerator with drawings, tape curling at the edges, paper fluttering when the door opened, and there were shoes by the door again, 2 pairs placed neatly side by side. There was no lock on the outside. Lauren sat at the dining table one evening, Kiara at her side with a crayon between her fingers. The girl was hunched over a new drawing pad that Ava had brought earlier that week. Lauren glanced over. On the page, Kiara had drawn a house with large windows, a tall tree beside it, and 2 stick figures standing in front. Above them, a rainbow arched across the sky. "What's this one called?" Lauren asked gently. Kiara paused. The house with no locks. Lauren's chest tightened. "That's a good name." Kiara nodded and kept coloring. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. She had added a 3rd figure this time, a smaller one with a ponytail and round glasses. Miss Ava. It was small that moment, simple, but Lauren held it close. The drawings had changed. The heavy lines and dark shapes had been replaced with color. Not all the time, not every page, but enough. There were blues and yellows again. She'd even seen pink once. At school, Kiara had begun talking again. Her teacher sent home notes reporting that she had made a new friend, a boy named Daniel, who sat beside her and told stories about frogs. She participated in circle time. She read out loud. She smiled. Still, there were shadows. One morning, a door slammed in the hallway of the community center, and Kiara dropped her cereal spoon and burst into tears. Lauren knelt and held her until the shaking stopped. At night, Kiara sometimes crawled into bed without speaking, needing nothing more than to hear her mother's breath. And sometimes she cried in her sleep, murmuring words that made Lauren's heart ache. But she was moving forward. They both were. Lauren continued her work at the library. Her hours had increased slightly, and she now ran a small weekly story hour for children in the neighborhood. It had started with only 3 families, but word had spread. The room filled each Tuesday afternoon with the sounds of children's laughter, the rustle of pages, the occasional tantrum, and always the warm rhythm of Lauren's voice as she brought stories to life. Parents stayed to listen, too. They greeted her with kindness, with trust. No one asked about the past. That silence felt like a kindness. One afternoon, Ava arrived early to pick up Kiara from school. They sat together on a bench beneath the big tree that Kiara had drawn so many times, waiting for dismissal. When Kiara appeared, her face lit up. She ran toward Ava and grabbed her hand without hesitation. "I made something," Kiara said. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack and handed it over. It was a drawing of Ava and Kiara sitting under the tree, with words written in blocky, uneven handwriting beneath them. "Sometimes sunshine finds you when you're not looking." Ava blinked back tears. "This is beautiful." "It's for the wall," Kiara said, "so other kids can see it and feel better." That evening, Ava gave the drawing to Lauren, and they pinned it to the corkboard in the community center's front hallway. It hung among other artwork from children staying in the transitional units, bright pieces of resilience that whispered of pain, yes, but also of survival. Lauren's sessions with her therapist grew deeper. She spoke now about the night under the bed, not just in flashes and fragments, but in full sentences. She admitted the way time had stretched, the way she'd convinced herself she would die without being found, and how the thought that Kiara was still alive had been the only thing that kept her tethered to breath. "There was a moment," she told Marcia one afternoon, "when I thought, if I never get out, I hope she doesn't find me like this. I hoped she'd forget me before she saw me like that." Marcia didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "But she didn't forget, and she never will, and she didn't find you. She saved you." Lauren nodded slowly. Yes, she did. The words lingered in her mind long after the session ended. Kiara hadn't just survived. She had fought. She had drawn her way to truth. She had told someone, and because of that, Lauren was still alive. A few weeks later, Carter came by with news. "The trial is scheduled," she said. "Preliminary hearing first, then jury selection. It's going to be a process, but it's moving." Lauren exhaled. "Will I have to testify?" "Likely, yes, but we'll prepare you. You won't be alone." Lauren nodded. "What about Kiara?" "She won't be required to appear. We'll use her statements and the artwork. There's enough corroborating evidence." Lauren didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them together. "He'll see me," she said at last. "He'll look at me and think he still owns a piece of me." Carter's expression hardened. "He doesn't." "I know that," Lauren said, "but he doesn't. We'll remind him." In the meantime, life continued. Kiara's class prepared for an art exhibit to be displayed in the school hallway. Parents were invited. Lauren was nervous. Large crowds still made her anxious, but Kiara begged her to come. When they arrived, the hallway buzzed with noise. Tables lined the walls, each covered in drawings, collages, and sculptures made from paper, pipe cleaners, and bits of cardboard. Kiara's drawing was centered in the middle of her class's display. It showed her and Lauren standing under a wide rainbow, both of them holding balloons. Above them were the words, "Even after the storm, we're still together." Other parents passed by and smiled. A few paused and commented on the colors, the handwriting. Lauren stood behind Kiara, watching, a lump in her throat. A small boy approached and pointed to the drawing. "That's you?" he asked Kiara. Kiara nodded. "It's nice," he said. "Thanks," she replied. It was simple, but something unknotted inside Lauren as she listened. They were returning, not to who they had been, but to something new, something earned. And there was more color now. Color in the way Kiara laughed on the swing set. Color in the chalk drawings she made on the sidewalk. Color in the way Lauren looked at her daughter and saw not just what they had endured, but what they had become. They were not broken. They were blooming. There was a stillness in the late summer air that seemed to wrap around the town like a warm blanket. The breeze no longer carried the crisp urgency of spring, but moved slowly with the gentle hush of August. The trees stood tall and full, their leaves heavy with the weight of the season, and the community center's garden bloomed in defiant color. Sunflowers, lilies, wild marigolds, all rising, as if reaching for something just beyond the sky. Lauren stood near the gate, watching Kiara chase Bubbles across the grass. The girl ran without hesitation now, laughing and burst, her limbs loose and unafraid. Each time the bubbles drifted higher, she leapt and twirled, her voice floating with them. Lauren smiled but stayed where she was, her hands wrapped around a warm paper cup of tea. Her eyes followed her daughter, holding her close without touching her. It had been months since that long, terrifying night, and in that time their world had been slowly pieced back together, not as it was, but as something new, stronger, wiser, full of breath again. They had received confirmation from the Victim Services Liaison that their time in the transitional housing unit was ending. The next phase, permanent placement, was approved. They were moving. Not far, but far enough that it felt like a step into a new chapter. Lauren had found them a small rental house just across town. a modest one-story with blue shutters, a creaking porch, and a big oak tree in the front yard. It wasn't much, but it had light in every room and space to grow roots. Best of all, it didn't carry the memory of him, of being watched, followed, silenced. She'd brought Kiara to see the house earlier that week. They had walked through each room together, Lauren narrating aloud the possibilities. "This could be your reading corner," she said, gesturing to the sunlit alcove in the living room. "And maybe we can put wind chimes on the porch." Kiara had said little at first, wandering quietly from room to room. Then, in the kitchen, she looked up at her mother and asked, "Can we paint it yellow?" Lauren nodded. "Whatever color you want." That had sealed it. The house would be yellow. Now, as Kiara danced across the field with another little girl from the center, Lauren exhaled deeply and let herself believe they were ready. The courtroom was scheduled for the following week. Despite the preparations, Lauren still felt a slow, churning dread in the pit of her stomach. She had gone over her testimony multiple times with the prosecutor, had sat in mock questioning, had practiced answering gently but firmly when asked to recall the events. She had been told she was strong, that she was credible, that her story mattered, but none of that could change the fact that he would be in the room. Richard Evans, the man who had looked her in the eyes and told her she would never be alone again, who had crept through her home, taken her body, her voice, her daughter's innocence, and tried to wrap them in his warped idea of affection. She still saw his smile in dreams sometimes, still heard the scrape of the carpet against her back. And yet, she would go. She would walk into that courtroom with her chin raised and her shoulders back. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear was no longer in charge. The night before the hearing, Lauren sat on the edge of Kiara's bed, folding laundry. The girl was coloring beside her, tongue between her teeth, as she filled in the petals of a sunflower with a golden crayon. "Are we going to the new house tomorrow?" Kiara asked without looking up. "Not tomorrow, baby. Soon." "After court?" "Yes," Lauren said, folding a soft shirt. "After court." Kiara nodded. "Will he be there?" Lauren paused, then said, "Yes, but only for a little while. Then we'll never see him again." Kiara looked at her mother. "Will he go under the bed this time?" Lauren blinked slowly. "No, he'll be somewhere far away, and he won't be able to hurt anyone anymore." The girl thought about this for a moment, then returned to her drawing. "Okay," she said, "as long as he can't come in our yellow kitchen." The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that seemed to hum against the skin, making bones feel brittle. Lauren sat at the front between her lawyer and the victim advocate. Her palms were sweating despite the chill. Across the room, Richard sat with his defense attorney, wearing the same smug calm he always wore, as though he believed nothing bad could touch him. He had pleaded not guilty. Lauren's heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained still. She refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching. When she was called to the stand, the room tilted slightly. She stood carefully, walked with measured steps. Her heels echoed across the floor. She sat, adjusted the microphone. She didn't look at him. The prosecutor guided her gently through her testimony, starting with the earliest incidents. The gifts, the notes, the moments that felt off, the fear she swallowed. Then came the night. The click of the lock, the blow, the hours, days under the bed, the silence. She didn't cry. She didn't stutter. Her voice trembled only once when she said, "I thought my daughter would find me dead." The defense tried to discredit her. They implied she had overreacted. that the relationship had been friendly, that perhaps there was confusion, misinterpretation, trauma distorting memory. Lauren looked the defense attorney in the eye and said, "I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. He planned it. He tied me up. He locked me under the bed and left my daughter alone for 3 days. He told her we were a family." She stepped down with her head held high. Mary, the woman from Richard's past, testified next. She had flown in from another state. Her voice shook, but her words landed like steel. She described his behavior, the threats, the obsession, the silence of the legal system when she tried to warn them years before. Kiara's drawings were admitted into evidence. They were displayed on a screen. The house, the black room, the figure under the bed, the words written in a child's hand. Shh. The courtroom was silent. When the closing arguments ended, the jury was dismissed. Lauren stepped outside with Carter and the prosecutor. The air was hot and still. She sat on the bench and pressed her hands together. "How long?" she asked. "Could be a few hours, could be a day." They waited. The verdict came that evening. Guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, unlawful restraint, child endangerment, attempted custodial interference. The judge sentenced him to 25 years with no possibility of parole for the first 15. A lifetime restraining order was granted. He was to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Lauren or Kiara for the rest of his life. The room held its breath as the sentence was read. Lauren let hers go. They moved into the new house 3 days later. The kitchen was painted yellow. The windows stayed open. The locks were only on the inside. Kiara decorated her room with drawings and taped a sign to her door that said, "Safe Zone." She invited Daniel over to play. They built forts and told stories. She laughed. She ran barefoot through the grass in the backyard. She drew a new picture for the fridge. It showed her and her mother standing in a field under a rainbow, wearing capes. Superheroes. Lauren framed it. One evening, after dinner, Kiara sat beside her on the porch steps, the twilight painting their shadows long and soft. "Mommy?" "Yes?" "Can we stay here forever?" Lauren looked out across the yard. Fireflies blinked lazily in the fading light. "I hope so, baby." Kiara nodded. "If any kid ever feels scared, I'll tell them what we did, that we got out." Lauren reached for her daughter's hand. "That's a beautiful thing to share." Kiara leaned against her. "It's not scary anymore. Not even a little?" "Just sometimes," she said, "but I draw it out." Lauren kissed the top of her head. "That's called being brave." They sat there as the stars appeared one by one until the sky was full again, and for the first time in a long, long time, the silence around them was peace. No creaking footsteps, no whispers through floorboards, no locks outside doors, only wind, only laughter, only home. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true life stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it and be sure to check out our other videos. You won't want to miss what's coming next.